The sound was an apparition, a ghost of a chime so delicate it barely registered against the vast, melancholic tapestry of the string quartet. They were navigating a particularly bleak Bartók adagio, a soundscape of sorrow that filled the gilded, turn-of-the-century opulence of Gundel restaurant, its notes weaving through the heavy velvet drapes and catching on the intricate Zolnay porcelain. To the 99 other patrons lost in their glasses of golden Tokaji wine and paprika-dusted veal goulash, it was nothing. A stray noise, a diner carelessly setting down his water glass, a momentary metallic lapse in the cathedral-like reverence of the dining room. But to Alistair Finch, it was a thunderclap. Sealed in the damp metallic chill of a signals intelligence van, Alistair felt the sound not in his ears, but in the marrow of his bones. Parked 200 meters away on a darkened side street off Varos Ligeti Fasor, the van was his world, a cramped, humming cocoon of state-of-the-art electronics and stale, recycled air. The sound, filtered through a dozen layers of amplification and noise cancellation algorithms running on a quantum-annealed processor, was stripped of its subtlety. It resolved on his screen as a sharp, three-peaked spike on the audio waveform. 3 distinct, deliberately spaced taps of a fingernail against crystal. The signal. The abort code. The sound of a 6-year, multi-million-pound intelligence operation curdling into an unmitigated, catastrophic disaster. Alistair's heart, a tired, cynical muscle, long accustomed to the steady, metronomic rhythm of surveillance, gave a painful, arrhythmic lurch that made him gasp for air that wasn't there. He tasted stale, acidic coffee and the sharp, metallic tang of adrenaline flooding his system. The atmosphere in the van was a thick cocktail of scents, a sensory signature of his own anxiety. The dry, electric heat radiating from the humming server racks, a low G-sharp thrum that was the soundtrack to his life. The lingering ghost of the Gauloise's cigarettes he had chain-smoked an hour before, their acrid, dark tobacco perfume clinging to every surface like a shroud. And the faint, cold scent of a recent rain on the Budapest asphalt outside, a smell of damp earth and decay. On the central monitor before him, a high-definition, low-light feed showed the source of the sound. The image was transmitted from a microcamera, a marvel of miniaturization concealed within the stamen of a white lily in a lavish floral centerpiece. There he was, Lieutenant General Victor Orlov, codename Nightingale, his asset, his responsibility. One of the highest-ranking officers in the SVR, Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, and the most valuable source MI6 had cultivated in a generation. Victor's face, usually a mask of Slavic stoicism carved from granite, was ashen. His hand, the one that had just delivered the tripartite death knell against his wine glass, now rested on the pristine white linen of the tablecloth. The knuckles were bloodless, stark white against the weathered tan of his skin. He was looking not at his dinner companion, a bloated, sweating arms dealer named Dmitry Kuryakin, who was the official pretext for this meeting, but past him, towards the ornate, heavily carved wooden entrance of the restaurant. He had seen a ghost, and in their world, ghosts were always armed. "He's blown," Alistair breathed, the words fogging a small, cold patch on the metal of the console. His voice, transmitted not through a microphone but via a subdermal bone conduction implant nestled behind his right ear, was a calm, dispassionate whisper in the ears of his team. It was a practiced calm, a firewall of professionalism he erected around the frantic, clawing panic that was threatening to climb his throat. "Nightingale is compromised. Repeat, Nightingale is compromised. Stand by for a contingency cascade." In the restaurant, 30 feet from Victor, A young couple at a secluded corner table received the whisper as if it were a stray thought surfacing in their own minds. Mark and Sarah, code names Romeo and Juliet. To all appearances, they were wealthy American tourists from Greenwich, Connecticut, radiating an air of studied boredom with the mandatory romance of their European tour. Mark, with his soft, manicured hands and a bespoke Brioni suit that screamed old money, looked every inch the hedge fund manager indulging his trophy wife. Sarah, effortlessly elegant in a simple but exquisitely cut black dress from the Row, her only adornment a string of pearls, looked like the woman who spent his money with practiced ennui. In reality, Mark's soft hands could field strip his Sig Sauer P226 Legion in under 30 seconds in pitch darkness. The checkered G10 grips as familiar to his touch as a lover's skin. Its precisely milled slide and the crisp break of its custom trigger a source of cold comfort. And Sarah's mind was a tactical computer of terrifying efficiency, capable of processing threat vectors, escape routes, and asset vulnerabilities faster than the humming processors in Alistair's van. They didn't flinch. Their composure was absolute. They didn't even exchange a glance, an act that would have been a catastrophic breach of protocol. Sarah's eyes, a placid, forgettable blue, flickered towards the entrance, her brain processing the visual data with inhuman speed, tagging faces, assessing postures, noting the subtle, unnatural bulge of a weapon beneath a poorly tailored jacket. Mark's gaze dropped to his plate, his fork continuing to push a piece of perfectly seared foie gras around, the very picture of nonchalant, privileged dining. Beneath the table, his left hand rested on his thigh, a breath away from the cig holstered in the small of his back. Visual on the threat? Alistair's voice was a scalpel in their minds, precise and sharp, cutting through the rising static of their own pounding hearts. "Affirmative, Watcher," Sarah murmured, her lips barely moving, the words a sub-vocalization lost in the ambient murmur of the room and the mournful strings of the quartet. Female, late 40s, maybe early 50s. Black wool coat, severe gray-streaked haircut, flanked by two males, classic Federal Security Service build, thick necks, dead eyes, suits that don't hang right. They're holding at the maitre d's station. She's scanning the room, methodical, like a sniper choosing a target. She hasn't made him yet, but she knows he's here. Her posture, it's pure predator. An apex predator in a new ecosystem. Alistair's fingers, long and nimble, danced across a reinforced keyboard, the clicks muffled by the van's acoustic foam soundproofing. He pulled up a satellite feed of the area, layering thermal overlays and cross-referencing the facial recognition data Sarah's own optic implant was streaming back in a compressed, encrypted burst over the 433.92 MHz UHF band. The system churned for a fraction of a second, the server rack beside him whining in protest as it cross-referenced the image against the Five Eyes hostile actor database. A file bloomed on a secondary screen, stark and menacing. Colonel Eva Molnar. Alistair's blood ran cold. Not SVR. Worse. The AVH, Hungary's resurrected state protection authority, a ghost of the Cold War given new, vicious teeth by the current nationalist regime. But her file had a thick, red-bordered addendum, flagged for extreme caution. Unofficial liaison to the SVR's Department K counterintelligence. A hunter? A specialist in tracking and neutralizing traitors. They called her the Wolf of the Danube, a reputation earned through a series of brutal and ruthlessly efficient neutralizations in Vienna, Prague, and Berlin. Her signature was to make betrayals look like suicides or tragic accidents, leaving behind a trail of clean files and terrified whispers. "It's Molnar," Alistair stated, the name tasting like acid. She's not supposed to be in country. This is a dedicated kill or capture team. Kuryakin was the bait. The whole dinner is a cage. The entire operation had been 6 agonizing years in the making. 6 years of Alistair's life, of Victor's terror. 6 years of dead drops in the frozen, unforgiving landscape of Moscow's Gorky Park. The crunch of snow underfoot, a constant, screaming threat of discovery. 6 years of whispered secrets in the back of Viennese opera houses, the soaring music of Mozart, a cover for the quiet cadence of treason. 6 years of painstaking, nerve-shredding cultivation. Viktor Orlov was no simple trader selling secrets for cash. He was an ideologue, a man forged in the crucible of the Soviet system, who had watched with cold fury as his country's soul was sold to a cabal of kleptocrats and thugs. The final, irreparable straw had been the death of his son, Alexei, a young, fiercely idealistic journalist who had gotten too close to the truth about a certain nerve agent program in Syria. Alexei had died in a single-vehicle car accident on a perfectly straight, dry road. From that day, Victor had become a ghost in his own machine, feeding MI6 a steady stream of intelligence that had quietly averted 3 major European crises and saved countless lives. He did it not for them, but for the memory of his boy. Tonight was supposed to be the culmination, the final handoff, the exfiltration. Victor was carrying the Prometheus key. It was not a physical object. A flash drive or a microdot would be amateur hour, an invitation to discovery and torture. The key was a memorized, multi-layered sequence of codes, bearer bond numbers from Geneva free ports, the names of compromised bankers in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands, and the intricate Byzantine routes of bank transfers that mapped the SVR's entire covert financial network. The slush fund used to finance destabilization campaigns, assassinations, and political interference across the West. It was the holy grail of modern espionage. With it, London and Washington could dismantle Russia's shadow war machine, piece by piece, starving it of the dark money that was its lifeblood. The extraction plan had been elegant in its simplicity. A simple dinner, a feigned bout of food poisoning, a waiting car to a private airfield outside Budapest where a Gulfstream G650 sat waiting, its flight plan logged for Dubai. It was supposed to be quiet. Molnar's presence turned it into a bloodbath waiting to happen. "Cascade is a no-go," Mark whispered into the void, his voice a flat line. "They're watching the exits. 2 men outside, posing as smokers near the valet stand. Thermal shows they're carrying Makarovs, maybe something heavier. Looks like a Stechkin APS under the coat of the big one. We try to walk him out, they'll drop us all before we hit the pavement." "Agreed," Alistair said, his mind racing through the protocols, the branching decision trees of catastrophic failure. Plan A was blown. Plan B, a simple extraction under duress, was a suicide pact. That left Plan C, the one nobody ever wanted to use, the one designed for precisely this scenario, when the walls are sealed, the guns are drawn, and the only way out is through the looking glass. "Right. New orders. We're not walking him out. We're carrying him out. Romeo, Juliet, prepare to initiate Protocol MI6. A beat of charged silence resonated over the encrypted network. Even through the digital ether, Alistair could feel the sudden, sharp intake of breath from his field team. MI6 was a myth, a training exercise conducted in a hyper-realistic simulation facility in the Brecon Beacons known as the Abattoir. It was a theoretical gambit so audacious, so complex and fraught with risk. It was spoken of in the hushed, reverent tones reserved for legends like The Man Who Never Was. No one had ever run it live. "Watcher, confirm." Sarah's voice was tight, the professional calm strained to its absolute limit. You're ordering Midas? Confirmed, Alistair said, his own voice a fortress of calm he did not feel. Inside, his stomach was a cold, knotted rope. The Prometheus key does not fall into Molnar's hands, whatever the cost. Juliet, you are primary distraction. Romeo, you are primary intervention. Nightingale is the patient. I am the conductor. On my mark. He looked at the feeds, his world shrinking to the 3 glowing rectangles in the back of the van. On one, the cool blue thermal outline of Molnar's team, spreading out like a cancer through the restaurant's elegant floor plan. Their heat signatures brighter, hotter than the civilians around them. On another, the frantic schematics of the building, laid over blueprints procured by a local asset months ago. And in the center, Viktor Orlov, a man who knew he was about to die, trying to look as if he were merely enjoying the last meal of his life. The core of Protocol Midas was deception built on a foundation of absolute medical and theatrical precision. You couldn't just fake a heart attack. You had to orchestrate one. You had to make it so real, so terrifyingly, clinically authentic, that even a suspicious, blood-soaked counterintelligence colonel would be forced to play along, lest she expose her own black operation by letting a man die in the middle of a 5-star restaurant filled with foreign dignitaries and influential businessmen. It was weaponized public perception. Nightingale. Alistair's voice was now a soothing, hypnotic balm in Victor's ear. Victor wore a hearing aid, a standard bit of kit for a man his age. But this one had been supplied by MI6's Q branch and was, in reality, a sophisticated 2-way communication device. Listen to me, Victor. Do not react. We are getting you out. But you must follow my instructions to the letter. Do you understand? A tiny, almost imperceptible nod from the man on the screen. A single bead of sweat traced a path down his temple, catching the dim, romantic light. On the table, to your left, is a salt shaker. Not the one you have been using. The other one with the silver base. When I give the word, I want you to pick it up and twist the base, 1/4 turn to the right. Then set it down. This was the first gear in the complex, deadly machine. The salt shaker had been placed by their local asset, Istvan, a maitre d' whose daughter's exorbitant medical school fees in London were being paid for by a generous, anonymous British benefactor. The shaker was a marvel of microengineering. Twisting the base would arm a tiny, spring-loaded needle, no thicker than a human hair. The needle was tipped with a custom-synthesized compound codenamed Stingray, a fast-acting derivative of tetrodotoxin, the poison found in pufferfish. It wasn't designed to kill, not immediately. It was designed to perfectly mimic the onset of acute myocardial infarction. It would constrict the blood vessels, induce severe arrhythmia, cause massive referred pain in the chest and left arm, and trigger profuse diaphoresis. It was a heart attack in a bottle. The catch was terrifyingly simple. The effect was temporary, lasting only 12 minutes. And if the antidote wasn't administered within the first 5 of those minutes, the induced cardiac arrest would become a very real, very permanent one. Juliet, Alistair commanded, his voice sharp. Create the window. Now. In the restaurant, Sarah took a deep, centering breath, her heart a slow, heavy drum against her ribs. She caught Mark's eye across the table. He gave a microscopic nod, his face an impassive mask. She turned her attention to the sommelier, a man named Gabor, who was approaching with a bottle of ridiculously expensive 1982 Chateau Margaux. As Gabor began his reverent pour, his voice a low murmur of reverence for the vintage, Sarah suddenly jerked in her seat. It was a sharp, precise movement, perfectly disguised as a startled reaction to a napkin slipping from her lap. Her elbow connected perfectly with the sommelier's forearm. The bottle tipped, and a torrent of dark red wine, the color of arterial blood, cascaded across the white tablecloth, splashing onto the cream-colored trousers of a portly German industrialist at the adjacent table. The effect was instantaneous. A horrified gasp from the industrialist's wife. A string of guttural curses in German. Gabor, mortified, began stammering apologies, his face draining of all color. The maitre d' Istvan rushed over, his face a mask of professional panic. It was a small, contained incident, but in the hushed, mannered world of Gundel, it was a bomb going off. Every head in their quadrant of the restaurant turned, including, for a critical 1.5 seconds, the 2 SVR agents who had been trying to discreetly flank Victor's table. Even Colonel Molnar, still poised at the entrance like a waiting wolf, was momentarily distracted by the commotion. "Now, Victor, now!" Alistair's voice was a whip crack in the general's ear. On the screen, Victor's hand, slick with sweat, moved with the surprising speed of a man whose life depends on it. He picked up the salt shaker. A quick, sharp twist. He set it down. A tiny, burning prick on his thumb, no more than a splinter. He brought the thumb to his mouth in a natural gesture of thought, sucking on the microscopic wound. The toxin was in his bloodstream. The clock was ticking. "Window closed," Sarah murmured, resuming her role as the apologetic, slightly flustered American wife, dabbing at the stain with her own napkin. "He's done it." Alistair watched Victor's face, his own breath held tight in his chest. For 10 seconds, nothing. Then, the first sign, a slight widening of the eyes as the first wave of the toxin hit his nervous system. A subtle shift in his breathing. Victor's training was immense. He didn't gasp. He didn't cry out. He simply let the poison do its work, his body becoming a stage for their desperate play. He placed a hand on his chest, a gesture of indigestion. He said something to Kuryakin, who laughed, utterly oblivious, stuffing a piece of duck into his mouth. 30 seconds to full onset, Alistair announced. "Romeo, prepare for your entrance. Remember the script. You are Dr. Ben Carter, a cardiologist from Johns Hopkins. You are confident. You are arrogant. You are in charge." "Understood, Watcher," Mark replied, his own heart hammering against his ribs. He had practiced this in the abattoir 100 times, with hyper-realistic animatronics and actors screaming in his face. But this was real. The man he was about to save was a living, breathing asset, with the fate of Europe locked inside his memory. On the screen, Victor's performance began in earnest. His hand clenched on his chest, knuckles white. His face, already pale, took on a gray, waxy sheen. A film of cold sweat beaded on his forehead. He tried to take a sip of water, but his hand trembled so violently that he sloshed water onto the table. Kuryakin finally stopped talking, his fat face creasing with genuine concern. "Victor? Are you all right, my friend?" Victor didn't answer. He slumped forward, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. The string quartet faltered, the first violinist stopping mid-bow, his instrument screeching in protest. The carefully curated atmosphere of Gundel shattered like a dropped glass. A woman at a nearby table screamed. "Go," Alistair commanded. Mark was out of his chair before the echo of the scream had died. "Let me through," he shouted, his voice cutting through the rising panic with an authoritative, mid-Atlantic accent honed by years of practice and a dialect coach. "I'm a doctor." He moved with an urgent, practiced purpose, pushing past a terrified waiter, his eyes locked on Victor. Sarah was right behind him, playing the part of the concerned but capable wife, creating a buffer, keeping the gawking patrons at a distance with firm but polite gestures. "Give him some air," she urged. "Please, step back." Mark reached the table just as Victor slid from his chair, Kuryakin failing to catch his dead weight. Mark knelt, his movements economical and precise. He put 2 fingers to Victor's neck, feeling for a pulse he knew would be thready and terrifyingly erratic. With a decisive rip, he tore open Victor's expensive shirt, revealing the pale, sweating skin beneath. "Someone call an ambulance," he barked, not at anyone in particular, but at the room, projecting his voice to the rafters. "Call 112. Tell them it's a suspected massive coronary. Now." This was another crucial piece of the puzzle. The call would go to the real Hungarian emergency services. But MI6's tech division had already inserted a ghost program into the city's dispatch system weeks ago. Any call from this specific GPS location reporting a cardiac arrest would be automatically rerouted to a single, dedicated burner phone. The phone was currently sitting on the console next to Alistair in the van, silent. On the floor, Mark began chest compressions. Not real ones. Those would break ribs and complicate the exfiltration. These were theatrical. Timed to look brutally real from a distance, his hands rising and falling with practiced rhythm, his face a mask of intense concentration. He was buying time, creating a scene of desperate medical intervention, a bubble of chaos that he controlled completely. Colonel Molnar was now moving through the restaurant, her 2 agents flanking her like wolves, pushing through the chaos. She wasn't running. She walked with a cold, predatory calm, her eyes narrowed, taking in every detail. She saw Mark, the foreigner, working on the collapsed man. She saw Kuryakin, sputtering and useless. She saw the panic, and her instincts, honed over decades of hunting traitors, screamed that something was wrong. "Romeo, she's closing," Alistair warned, his voice a low hum in Mark's ear. 30 seconds. Mark leaned down, ostensibly to give mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. "Victor," he whispered, his lips brushing the old man's ear, the scent of expensive aftershave and fear filling his nostrils. "The antidote is coming. Stay with us. Just a little longer." Victor gave a weak, almost imperceptible flicker of his eyelids. He was still conscious, a prisoner inside a body that was screaming in agony. As Mark worked, Sarah was performing her own part of the symphony. She had Kuryakin by the arm, her voice a perfect mixture of frantic concern and authority. "Sir, did he complain of any pain before this? Any shortness of breath? Did he take any medication this morning?" She was peppering him with questions, keeping him disoriented, keeping his attention focused on her and away from the finer details of Mark's medical treatment. The burner phone in the van buzzed. Alistair tapped the screen. "Dispexer," he answered in flawless, unaccented Hungarian. He listened to the frantic voice of Istvan, the maitre d', on the other end, playing his part to perfection. "Yes, I understand," Alistair said calmly. "Gundel restaurant. Man down, suspected cardiac arrest. An ambulance has been dispatched. ETA is 8 minutes. Keep the patient calm. Do not move him." He cut the connection. He switched channels. "Driver, you are green. 8 minutes. Sell the timeline. Go." 3 blocks away, a nondescript blue and white van pulled out of a darkened alley. Inside, Marcus, an ex-SAS driver with nerves of tungsten, was already pulling on the uniform of a Hungarian paramedic over his tactical gear. The van itself was a work of art. On the outside, a perfect clone of a Budapest city ambulance, right down to the authentic scuff marks and faded Orzagos Mentoshol Galat logos. Inside, it was a mobile extraction unit, complete with a hidden weapons locker, a state-of-the-art communications suite, and a reinforced false floor. Back in the restaurant, Molnar had reached the scene. She stood over Mark, her shadow falling across him and Victor. Her two agents fanned out, their hands inside their jackets, creating a hard perimeter. The restaurant patrons had been herded back by the staff, but Molnar's men were the real wall. "Who are you?" Molnar's voice was low, heavily accented, and carried the chilling authority of a state-sanctioned killer. Mark didn't look up. "I'm a doctor," he grunted between compressions. "Dr. Ben Carter, Johns Hopkins Cardiology. I'm on vacation. Now please stand back. I need space to work." He was radiating an aura of professional arrogance and extreme stress, a combination designed to put even the most assertive people on the back foot. Molnar was not most people. She knelt, her cold gray eyes examining Victor's face. She saw the gray skin, the beads of sweat, the slack jaw. It all looked real. Too real. "What happened?" she asked, her gaze flicking to Mark's hands, to his face, searching for a tell, a flicker of deceit. "What does it look like?" Mark shot back, his voice raw with manufactured exasperation. "It's a heart attack. Massive. His pulse is thready. He's going into V-fib. He's circling the drain." He was throwing out medical jargon like grenades, building a wall of expertise and urgency. Alistair watched the digital clock on his monitor. 3 minutes, 15 seconds since the toxin was administered. The window for the antidote was closing fast. If Mark didn't act now, Victor's fake heart attack would become a very real autopsy. "Romeo, you have to administer the counteragent," Alistair whispered urgently. "She's too close. You need another distraction. A bigger one." Mark understood instantly. He looked up from Victor's body, his eyes wide with calculated panic. "I'm losing him," he yelled, his voice cracking. "I need a defibrillator. Does this place have an AED?" It was a brilliant, desperate move. He was escalating the medical drama, forcing everyone, including Molnar, to react to his script. The maitre d' looked utterly confused. A what?" "An automated external defibrillator," Mark shouted, his voice echoing in the now silent room. "A shock box for his heart. Does anyone see one?" This was Sarah's cue. "There," she cried, her voice sharp and clear, pointing to a small red box on a distant wall near the swinging doors to the kitchens. "I saw one when we came in." It was, of course, a complete lie. There was no AED, but the entire restaurant staff, now caught up in the life-or-death drama, turned as one to look where she was pointing. Molnar's two agents, conditioned to react to any sudden shout or movement, also glanced in that direction. Even Molnar herself, for the barest fraction of a second, turned her head. It was all Mark needed. In that sliver of time, his right hand, which had been concealed beneath Victor's back, came free. It wasn't empty. He was holding a small metallic object that looked like a silver fountain pen. It was a Model 7 pressurized gas jet auto-injector, loaded with a precise cocktail of atropine and neostigmine, the antidote. He pressed the tip against Victor's ribs, under the armpit, completely hidden from view. There was a faint hiss, quieter than a breath. The entire payload of the antidote was delivered directly into the intercostal muscle, ensuring rapid absorption into the bloodstream. He palmed the injector, and it was gone, back into a hidden pocket in his sleeve. The entire action had taken less than a second. He resumed compressions immediately. "It's no good," he yelled, selling the final act with an Oscar-worthy performance of despair. "We need that ambulance now." Alistair watched the thermal feed. He saw the heat signature around Victor's heart, which had been fading into a dangerous cool blue, suddenly begin to stabilize, blooming back to a steady orange. The antidote was working. The arrhythmia was subsiding, but the outward symptoms, the pallor, the sweating, would take another minute or two to fade. They had to get him out before he started to look too healthy. The distant, rising wail of a siren began to cut through the night. Marcus, the driver, was a virtuoso. He was timing his arrival perfectly. Not too fast, which would be suspicious. Not too slow, which would be fatal. Just right for a struggling city ambulance navigating a busy Friday night in Budapest. The siren grew louder, a promise of salvation. 2 men in paramedic uniforms rushed in with a gurney and a medical bag. They were, of course, MI6 field agents, part of the exfil team. They moved with a clipped, weary professionalism that was utterly convincing. "What have we got?" the first paramedic asked, kneeling beside Mark, his Hungarian perfect. "Male, mid-60s, Mark reported, breathless, never breaking character. "Sudden collapse. I've been doing CPR for about 6 minutes. Faint pulse, suspect massive infarction." The paramedics began efficiently loading Victor onto the gurney, attaching fake EKG pads to his chest, and placing an oxygen mask over his face. Molnar watched every move, her face a stone mask of intense suspicion. She had lost control of the situation, and she knew it. The tide of public decency and medical emergency had swept her aside. "We are taking him to St. Istvan Hospital," the lead paramedic announced to the room. He looked directly at Molnar. "We must go, now." Molnar stepped forward, holding up a hand, a gesture of absolute authority. "I am Colonel Molnar, State Security. This man is a person of interest in a state matter. I will be accompanying him to the hospital." This was the final critical moment. The flashpoint. Alistair held his breath, his hand hovering over a button that would send a silent signal for the paramedics to draw their concealed weapons. It would mean a firefight, a bloodbath, and the almost certain failure of the mission. It was down to Mark. Mark stood up, his face a mask of incandescent fury and disbelief. He got right in Molnar's face, violating her personal space, a tactic of pure intimidation. "Are you insane?" he spat, his voice dripping with the condescension of a man who saves lives confronting a bureaucrat who takes them. "This man is actively dying. His heart is unstable. We have a 90-second window to get him on a bypass machine or he is gone. Every second you delay, you are killing him. I don't care if you're the Queen of fucking England, you are not getting in that ambulance. Now get out of my way, or I will have you arrested for obstruction of a medical emergency." He turned to the paramedics, his voice a roar. "Go! Move!" It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. He had framed her choice perfectly. Let them go, or be the cold-hearted bureaucrat who let a man die in front of 200 witnesses, many of them foreign nationals with cameras in their phones. Her authority, so absolute in the shadows of a Lubyanka interrogation room, meant nothing here in the bright lights of a public spectacle. Molnar's eyes were chips of ice. She stared at Mark, searching his face, and for a heart-stopping moment, Alistair thought she would call his bluff. She saw something in his eyes, not fear, but the unwavering conviction of a zealot. She hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, she lost. The paramedics shouldered past her, pushing the gurney towards the exit. Her 2 agents looked at her for a command, but she gave none. They could do nothing without exposing themselves, without turning a covert operation into an international incident. Mark and Sarah followed the gurney, a perfect picture of the concerned doctor and his companion seeing the patient off. The ambulance doors slammed shut. Marcus hit the siren and the gas simultaneously. The vehicle lurched away from the curb, its lights painting the street in frantic strokes of red and blue. Alistair watched on his monitor as Colonel Eva Molnar stood on the sidewalk, impotent, staring after the departing ambulance. She had been outplayed, outmaneuvered not by force, but by theater. She pulled out a phone and began shouting into it, but it was too late. The ghost was gone. Inside the ambulance, the scene transformed with controlled, silent efficiency. The siren was cut. The flashing lights were extinguished. Marcus took a sharp right, then a left, diving into a warren of pre-planned side streets, his route a randomized algorithm designed to defeat any pursuit. In the back, the theatrical resuscitation ended. One of the paramedics peeled the fake EKG pads off Victor's chest, while Mark administered a second, milder injection, a stimulant to counteract the lingering sedative effects of the antidote. Victor's eyes fluttered open. He coughed, a deep, rattling sound, his body still trembling from the ordeal. He looked up at the unfamiliar faces staring down at him in the dim light of the cabin. "Did it work?" he rasped, his voice hoarse. "It worked, Nightingale," Mark said, a thin, exhausted smile touching his lips for the first time that night. "Welcome back to the living." Sarah was already stripping off her dress, revealing the practical black tactical gear she wore beneath. The paramedics were opening a hidden compartment in the floor, revealing stacks of electronics and weapons. The ambulance was transforming back into what it truly was: a Trojan horse. Alistair's voice filled the cabin, crisp and clear from a concealed speaker. "Well done, all. Phase 1 is complete, but Molnar will have every checkpoint in the city locked down in the next 10 minutes. Driver, proceed to Waypoint Delta. We're going underground." The ambulance sped through the darkened streets of Budapest, heading for a derelict warehouse on the industrial banks of the Danube. It drove straight inside, the great corrugated metal doors rolling shut behind it with a final, echoing boom. The extraction was far from over, but the most dangerous part was done. Inside the cold, cavernous space, smelling of river damp and old diesel, Victor was helped to his feet. He was weak, but his mind was clear. Alistair's voice came from a speaker on a nearby table. "Victor, we need the key. We need it now, while it's fresh." Victor nodded, his face grim. He sat down at a small table as an agent placed a ruggedized laptop in front of him. For the next 2 hours, in the damp, chilly air of the warehouse, Viktor Orlov, the man who had died and been reborn in the middle of Gundel restaurant, began to talk. He didn't hand over a flash drive or a microdot. The risk of carrying a physical object had always been too great. He simply began to recite, from memory, the intricate web of shell corporations in Panama, the offshore accounts in Macau, the names of compromised bankers from Zurich to Dubai, and the transit routes for illicit cash that constituted the SVR's financial empire. The Prometheus key wasn't an object. It was him. His mind was the prize. The entire, spectacular, heart-stopping piece of theater at the restaurant hadn't been to extract a package. It had been to extract the librarian. As the data streamed across the encrypted network back to GCHQ in Cheltenham, Alistair finally allowed himself to lean back in his chair in the quiet of his own van, now parked safely in the corner of the warehouse. He watched the lines of code fill the screen, a digital death sentence for a decade of Russian covert operations. He thought of Molnar, the wolf, left with nothing but a stained tablecloth and a very expensive wine bill. He thought of the sheer, insane audacity of the MI6 protocol. They hadn't just faked a heart attack. They had weaponized the fundamental decency of the civilized world. They had used the instinct to help, the authority of a doctor, and the panic of a medical emergency as a shield and a sword against those who operate without rules. It was a new kind of warfare, fought not with bullets, but with belief. Alistair closed his eyes, the profound exhaustion of the last 6 hours washing over him. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind the familiar, metallic taste of the Cold War calculus. One asset extracted. A network in Budapest, including the heroic Maitre de Istvan and his family, now completely burned and needing immediate evacuation. 3 field agents who would need new identities and months of psychological debriefing. The cost was high, but as he looked at the torrent of intelligence flowing onto his screen, a river of secrets that would cripple an enemy, he knew the price was worth it. In the great game, you don't win. You just buy time until the next move. And tonight, in a glittering Budapest restaurant, MI6 had bought the West a decade. He keyed his mic one last time, his voice a tired but triumphant whisper in the cold Hungarian night. "Watcher to all stations. The nightingale is singing." He cut the comms and for a moment allowed himself the luxury of silence. He pulled up one last feed, a public traffic camera facing the entrance to Gundel. The ambulance was long gone, but the street was now filled with unmarked black sedans. Colonel Molnar stood under a street lamp, her face illuminated in the cold, pale light. She was no longer shouting into her phone. She was perfectly still, watching her own people. Forensic technicians in civilian clothes file into the restaurant. She was not defeated. She was learning. She was dissecting their methods, cataloging their audacity. She now knew a theatrical, public medical emergency was in their playbook. Protocol MI6, in its beautiful, terrifying brilliance, was a single-use weapon. The Wolf of the Danube had lost the battle, but Alistair knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that she was already preparing for the next hunt, armed with a new and dangerous piece of knowledge about the ghosts she pursued. The echo of their victory was the sound of a lesson being learned by their most dangerous enemy.